do you think we have the gifts of the Spirit? Do we operate in the gifts of the Spirit? What is the purpose of spiritual gifts, if not to enable us to do the work that brings the glory to God Almighty?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to There is a Word. My name is Bishop Marcia Dinkins, and I am glad that you can listen in with us tonight, view with us tonight on Facebook and YouTube. Tonight, I am so honored to be able to discuss voter suppression and how state and federal legislation is being passed to silence the voices of the least of these, and how faith leaders can stand with their communities and be instruments of change. This is a much needed conversation. Joining us tonight is State Representative Paula Hicks Hudson for District 44 in Ohio. Welcome. We have Reverend Dr. James H. Willis, Senior Pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church. Reverend Dr. Robert G. Burt, Senior Pastor of Glass City Church in Toledo, Ohio. Pastor John D. Walthall, pastor of Mount Ariat Baptist Church, also in Toledo, Ohio. While I mentioned our conversation will be about voter suppression, tonight we want to focus on legislation that the state of Ohio is attempting to pass, which is called House Bill 294. We're going to learn today what's behind HB 294? How does it impact us? What are the positives, if there's any? What are the negatives? And then as faith leaders, how do we stand with the least of these? How do we become instruments of change? And how do we allow the Spirit to use us so that we can stand up in our communities, stand up with our congregants, stand up arm in arm, voice to voice, and heart to heart for something that we have fought for such a long time? And one would laugh today if we thought that we would be at this place all over again. So tonight, I want to say again, welcome to our guest speakers, Representative Hicks Hudson, Pastor Dr. Reverend James H. Willis, Reverend Dr. Burt, Pastor John D. Walthall. Welcome, and thank you for being a part of There is a Word. Representative Hicks Hudson, I'd like to start. You're welcome. I'd like to start with you. Sometimes it gets like that awkward silence. So I'm like, okay, let me move on.
Okay.
But there's this, there has been massive attacks on voting rights across the United States with not only the federal government, with them not wanting to pass the federal legislation that passes in one house, but then they don't want to pass it. And we're steadily trying to push up against it. We've seen women, especially Black women, standing up and being arrested, taking out of, from the Hill and incarcerated, even if it's for a short amount of time, because we know that our vote is our voice. Mm-hmm. But we're also seeing this run rampant across the United States. And so it is my understanding that the state of Ohio has now joined in to make voting more difficult. And I believe it's Representative Bob Seitz who sponsored HB 294, which is called the Ohio Election Security and Modernization Act. Correct. I'd like for you to tell us about HB 294, its impacts on voter registration, absentee voting, access to voting, ballot drop boxes, early voting, shortened days and times for voting. And does this impact souls to the polls, which would greatly impact our faith communities?
Well, I'll start with the end. His name is Representative Seitz, and he and his colleague, another Republican, have introduced this legislation that's designed to, I believe, make it harder for people to vote. The House Bill 294 shortens the number of days that you have for early voting It also shortens the days and the way in which you can register people to vote. It limits the number of ballot boxes, although they say that it's been expanding to where a board of election can have up to 3 boxes, but those boxes have to be in one central location. Um, and, and really what this bill does, in my mind, is makes it difficult for people to vote. Right now, right now, current status is the law is silent about the number of ballot boxes. And it would be up to the Secretary of State to be able to make those rules as to how many ballot boxes there's going to be. But what this bill does is it takes it out of the hands of the Secretary of State, who is the top election official for the state, and in my opinion, hamstrings the Secretary of State's ability to handle and manage an election. There's some thoughts that they want to get rid of the Monday before the election because it makes it so difficult for boards of elections to get prepared for that election day. But I submit that the boards of elections have been able to do this since they've instituted this early vote process. And in doing that, this is another way, I think, to make it harder for people to vote. There's recently another bill that we're trying to get some information on and do a research on, which has just been introduced into the legislature that's even more restrictive than House Bill 294. And one of the things that Representative Seitz was saying to those of us who were in opposition to this bill was that, this bill is not as bad as what it could be. So the second bill that's coming forward is a bill that, in my opinion, is even more. I haven't read it all, but we're looking at the highlights of it. But we believe it's going to be even more restrictive. So what does this mean for voters? It means that it's that we've got to be vigilant. We have to be prepared to vote. They have not gotten rid of the weekend before the election. So souls to the polls right now still stands, because that would clearly be an example of in my opinion, voter suppression. There are things in this bill that are not necessary to be drafted in code, because it makes it harder if a new Secretary of State comes in to say, and with technology changing and things changing, there should be some flexibility for the secretary to be able to manage those elections. One part of this bill talks about security. And there's been a lot of myths, a lot of misinformation that's been put out that our elections are not secure, they're not safe. And the secretary made a big fanfare about the 11 or so people that they have allegations of, not proof, but allegations of voter misconduct. We don't know what that means yet, and there's not been any follow-up, but there's a lot of energy around making people afraid that their votes are not counted, their votes are not secure, and that dead people or people who are not eligible to vote are voting. And I can tell you that that's further in myth than in reality. And so what we must do is to be vigilant in our fight to make sure that everyone who is legally able to vote is given that ballot so that he or she can vote. And that we don't need to shorten any days. We don't need to make the changes. Because in doing that, it's going to be more difficult for people to vote. And I forgot to add that when we look at for absentee ballots, they're now requiring additional ways in which you have to verify that you say who you are. And again, those are things that I think are designed to make it harder for people to vote, and especially people of color and people who don't have a lot of times or resources to be able to go and get the necessary documentation, such as an ID or what have you, or being able to take off work because of their work schedule. And so there's a lot of things prepared for and ready to fight against. And the most important way that is knowledge. And I'm so glad, and I really appreciate you putting this panel on and us being able to talk about it right now.
Thank you, Representative Hicks Hudson. It's a lot into that. And we know, as Representative Hicks Hudson said, this is an attack on a specific set of people, not all people. And we have to be mindful of that. We have to look at what this time is really saying to us, both past when this election in 2020 took place and the present. And it's interesting how over the years, we've not had any difficulties or challenges with going to the ballot box and placing our vote until now. We've gotten to this place of conspiracy theories and ideologies and whatnot, and how these are being carried, which in my opinion amazes me, as to how quick truth can be bent in such a way, but also not amazing me because it speaks to what beliefs people have silently carried for such a long time. And so, with that being said, I'm going to ask each of the pastors, and I'm going to start with you, Pastor Walthall, and ask that you take about 3 to 5 minutes, to answer this question. And then after him, Pastor Willis, and then Pastor Burke. But the Black church has been key to the voting rights movement. Dr. King at the Lincoln Memorial framed voting rights as racial progress and democracy, suggesting that if we were given the ballot, we could make change that would eradicate barriers to voting, expand voter accessibility, and increase voter turnout. Given all the apathy, the despair, the political fatigue, grief, loss, previous violence at the polls, and hatred spreading across the United States, does King's message really ring true today? Is this something that, with all that's going on, that we can really see come to pass? And if so, how? And what is the church's role in helping to make this come to pass? And again, I'll start with you, Pastor Walthall.
Well, thank you so much for including me in this discussion. My situation is maybe a little different than others. I am very upset about this whole issue, but I'm not shocked. I'm a guy, they kid me a lot being a young man in an old man's body. But my grandparents played a big part in my upbringing. And my mother's people were from Arkansas, and my father's people from Georgia. And all my young life, I heard these horrendous stories about trying to vote and the things they did to try to stop you from voting. And it was real crude and real unsophisticated, how many jelly beans in a jar or whatnot. But now, as with so many other things, it's just a more sophisticated affront. And my issue is that we got to get, Dr. King was right on target with everything he said, but we got to get the young folks to understand the history that they're living in. I know with my children, I had to express to them how a big thing Rosa Parks and that situation did. Because in their mind, they just get on the bus and do whatever they had to do. But to find out and understand that there were actually people that weren't even allowed to sit in certain places, or had to get up. So I think if we can get our young folks to feel the same vibrancy and urgency to battle these sophisticated moves to disenfranchise folks, I think it'll be important. I know I always had to work a couple of jobs, and to have a wide window in when you can vote and how you can vote is very important. If they want to get back to one day and a couple hours on one day, that's going to cut out so many folks. And I'm like I said, I'm very upset, but I'm not shocked. And we just have to come together as clergy or whatever leaders and express to people how important this is. A lot of folks don't think this is a big thing. A lot of folks won't even vote. We came out real strong for President Obama, and that's good. Lets everybody know we can do it. But you got to have that same urgency in every election, and then hold them accountable for what they say they're going to do.
Thank you, Pastor Walthall, for that. And you're absolutely correct. It is about, I know for my young children, well, my young adult son, we do, there's that conversation, and he's 21. And I've said to him, "Are you going to vote?" And he said, "Why? My vote doesn't count." And if that's that apathy that's sitting there today with our young people, then the question becomes, where does that put us? Where does that put them in the future? Because we cross over to glory. Where does that put the future of our young people? Where does that put the future of the Black vote, the Black voice, the Black body? Where does it put people who are disenfranchised? Um, because we can't be complicit in this, but I believe a lot of times our young people just don't understand that. But Pastor Willis, I'd like for you to respond as well. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you, Bishop Dinkins, for having me on tonight. I feel honored to be in the presence of these two pastors, plus being here with my state representative. When you talk about House Bill 294 and you talk about voter suppression, it's enough to keep you upset on a continuous basis. However, this is nothing new to us. We've seen it, and we would think that we will be at a point to where it has gotten better. And I'm agreeing with Pastor Walthall as he talked about us getting the message to our younger people so that they can understand the struggle. Because as much as we fought in the early years, and I'm considered to be a senior citizen, I'm 7 years old, I've seen a lot take place, and it was not easy. But the one thing about it, our foreparents, they encouraged us to just press forward. My mind goes back to hearing Reverend Dr. Otis Moss talk about the fact of his father, how he had walked some 18 miles to a voting polls to get there and say, "Boy, it's closed. You got to go to the next one." That makes me angry every time I look at what is taking place with this House Bill 294. And as Black clergy, as churches, we have to press forward. The Bible tells us in 2 Timothy 1:7 that God did not give us a spirit of fear. So one thing for sure, we know that we have the ability, we have the power, we have the love, and we have a sound mind to try and press forward. But this particular House Bill 294, it sets the stage to let us know that what we thought was good, it's not actually any good. We still have to fight. And you can never get to a point to where you are comfortable, because every time you think you are comfortable, then something else comes up. And this is basically what has happened. I heard Dr. Walthall talk about how we came out and voted for Obama. We did that. We did that for 2 years in a row. And now what is happening, they're doing everything they can to make the voter process be a discouraging factor. And, it doesn't take much, because if you're not committed to be persistent, then whatever discouraging factor that's going to come up, you're going to buy into it. But our role as clergy is to try and make sure that the word stays out to our parishioners. We have to be consistent in our message. Voting is a process that we all have a part of, and we have to make sure that our vote gets in. It's easy to say my vote don't count, but you got to be able to understand, yes, your vote do count. It doesn't count if you don't vote. But the thing about it, when you vote, it does count. And we're at an area now to where we just have to keep moving forward. We have to be like the woman with the issue of blood. We have to just keep edging forward. And the more we edge forward, then it shows the powers at be that we're not afraid, and we're going to do what it takes. So our job as clergy is to stay on top of what has been fought for over the years. You mentioned Rosa Parks and those that have fought for justice. When you look at this House Bill 294, it's nothing but an injustice measurement. They're trying to do everything to discourage us. And one thing about the clergy, and I've been a part, and so have these men on this panel been a part of it, our role is to encourage the elderly. Matter of fact, try to give them rides to the polls, because of the fact that's some of the things that they really honor, is being able to vote. But when many of them are down and they're sickly, they figure that they've been forgotten about, but that's not true. So our job is to continue to encourage them and continue to do everything we can to try and aid them. So we just have to keep pressing forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Pastor Willis. I do think I heard you say that your vote only, it doesn't count only when you don't vote. I was going to ask you to say that again. When does your vote not count?
It don't count when you don't vote. And that's the thing we got to keep in mind. You know, your vote, it counts. And that's the one thing we got to continue to instill in others. Because you got many that have the notion that there's no need for me to vote because they're not going to do what I say. Well, if you don't vote, then you don't have a voice in that. But the thing about it is that we have to encourage those that even think like that, because it's very easy to get discouraged from what we've been through in the pandemic over the last year. That's a very discouraging factor, but it's encouraging to know that God is still with us. And that's the one thing that we got to hold on to. We cannot let that go. He's with us through it all. And all we have to do is be persistent, be committed, and be intentional. Thank you.
Thank you. Reminds me of the woman who wanted the king to move and he wouldn't respond, but she remained, she set the intent and she was persistent and she kept on until what? Things changed. And sometimes, you know, we get tired. It's like I said earlier in the question, that political fatigue. And when you're looking at politics constantly shifting and changing, we don't move at the speed of politics. So sometimes it feels like we have to sit down, you know, and it becomes depressing. It becomes to a point where you do ask yourself why. And then there are times you just say, you know, I'm done. You know, I used to hear my children say, stick a fork in me. I'm done. And we have to, if we're going to make that statement, I'm done, then we have to say, I'm done of taking all of these things that are trying to oppress and depress and suppress us. I'm done, you know, with all of these things that has tried to block me. And not only me, because we have to realize that this is connected to our legacy. This is connected to our children and what we set in place now, what we model now, because the children don't live by do as I say, you know, not as you see. They do as they see and not as you say. But on that note, Dr. Burt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Bishop Marcia Dinkins, and to our former Med State Representative Paula Hituckson. I'm glad to see you and praying for your fight. You're fighting for us, and we got your back. We got your back. You better believe that. And to Pastor Willis and Hawthorne, who you know, I work together. Hawthorne, who I work together on a number of different things. I want to see if I can concise what I want to say. You know, I love to talk, so I don't want to talk too much, but and I want to couch it in theology. Jesus says, first seek ye the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Kingdom is basileia. It's the rule and reign of God on earth. We want God to rule and reign on earth. You know, it's about our worldview. It's how we see the world, and we recognize that you're always going to have those enemies that are trying to take something away from you. And of course, they're going to come and they're going to try to redefine it and reshape it, and they're going to say it's good for this for us. It's good for everybody when we know it's not good for everybody. You know, but and so how I think there's I agree with John Maxwell, who says the greatest principle of leadership is influence. It is how we influence people. So we have to make these kinds of connections. And I think the greatest leader, in my view, who has ever been on earth is Jesus Christ. I think he's the greatest leader that has ever lived. So what Jesus would do, he would gather these people who are following him and he would teach them, he will equip them. I think that's part of the process, teaching people, helping people to understand what's going on, you know, in the most simplistic way possible. Because a lot of people don't connect to a lot of the verbiage, you know, but if we can simply teach people, here's what's going on, here's what's happening, here's what they're trying to do with voting rights in this country. I think, secondly, after Jesus would teach people, he'll feed them, you know, so he'd meet the physical need, Yeah, he and Mark 8, he had 4,000 men. So if he had 4,000 men, I didn't know tell how many people there. But the text says he taught them and then he fed them. And then he dealt with this small group of people. Let's call these pastors. Let's call these religious leaders. They were his disciples. And so after having some leftovers, 12 baskets left over in Mark 8, they got in a boat. He said, get in the boat. And they left 11. They only had one. They had one basket in the middle of the sea. They hadn't eaten all day. So now they're in the struggle. They fussing, and Jesus said, wait a minute, do you not still understand that word understand means? You still blind? You still don't know who I am? You don't know who I am. So he tells this story of a blind man. And let me concise the story, because they brought this blind man to Jesus, and Jesus took him, and the Bible says that Jesus touched him and asked him a question. Can you see? He said, I see men as trees. And then Jesus touched him again. He said, now I can see. Now that's intriguing to me, ladies and gentlemen, because it's evident this man wasn't born blind, because he could see men. He knew what men looked like, and he knew what trees looked like. So Jesus gave him what I call the bounce back. He took. Now watch this. He fed. He taught, he fed, and then he touched. I think that's a model of leadership for us. And then he asked his disciples, who do people say I am? Peter said, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then he says, and here's the thing I feel it needs to be done in terms of as pastors and leaders in the community. He says, he said, well, Peter, I got to go die. Peter said, no, you can't do that. That's not what we're looking for. He said, you get behind me. You're an adversary. You're Satan. So there are some people, in this discussion, that you got to put behind you. They're adversaries. They act like they are part of you. He said, no, you get away from me, Peter. I got to go. And he says, what we have to do is deny ourselves. This is for pastors, because this is not positional leadership. This is community leadership. This leadership about people. So we can't just kind of frame this thing about, I'm the pastor, I'm the big dog, I know everything, I got it all. No. He said, deny yourself, and then you move into suffering. Every great leader suffered. They illustrated suffering for us, to the point of death. You know how many people died so that we can vote? We got to be able to be willing to give our life, pick up our cross. Whenever you pick up your cross, you're suffering. But I'm going to tell you this, whenever you pick up your cross and you're suffering, you die. But there's always a resurrection Sunday. It's coming. So if we are willing to give ourselves to the point that they hang us on the cross, you ain't got to like me. I don't need your money. I don't need a hug from you. If you're against us, I don't need you. I'd rather suffer. You can talk about me. You can crucify me. But here's what I do know. When I die in the process, there's always going to be a resurrection Sunday. And that's hope. I'm telling you, hope is on the way. If we are willing to die, to suffer, to pick up our cross for this process, hope is on the way. I'm going to leave it right there, y'all. I talked too much already.
No, you didn't, and you brought out some powerful points, and like you said, the motto: he taught, he fed, he touched. But even after that, the story goes on to talk about those who are against you, and to be able to recognize. That's one of the things we have to be able to recognize who or what is against us in order for that thing to be put behind us, and what's not good for us. And part of the problem, I believe, is, and it's a two-sided coin here. One, we can ask, how does the Black church stand up? And people are calling for the Black church to stand up because they know the rich history of the Black church. But at the same time, we've got some Black pastors who have sold out to the adversary. And so it makes it hard for the Black church to have an authentic voice in this fight, because part of the voice is fragmented and you can only speak at a whisper because you already have a price tag on your back. And then those pastors who are willing to stand and suffer with the target on their chest kind of get intermingled into those who have the dollar sign on their back, which then makes it more probable or more easier. Let me use that word, because what I see here is, even though people are calling on the Black church to take on this great responsibility, we also have the church fighting the church. And so this is a question, when I think about what you said to Representative Hicks Hudson, we have your back. Knowing we do, we have to insulate those representatives or those people, the legislators, because the truth of the matter is, before she had state representative in front of her name, she was Paula Hicks, and when she got married, she became Paula Hicks Hudson. Now she can check me on the last name, but my whole point is, before the title came, she was still standing in the place of being Paula Hicks Hudson.
So can I
And
just
so,
jump?
yes,
I want.
ma'am.
Can I just jump in, because there's a lot of things I kept hitting to get off mute, but I didn't want to interrupt the flow from what the pastors have said. But I'm going to start with Reverend Burt and work backwards, because he used a term that I think is so important, and show that not only was Jesus a leader, but Jesus was an organizer. And being an organizer, you go where the people are. And so one of the challenges I think that the Black church has is that the people are not coming like they used to, and because what you said, Bishop Jenkins, with the dollar signs versus the targets on pastors' backs. I've been hearing recently where pastors are saying they're afraid to say who to vote for because of their nonprofit status. In the old days, there were preachers who knew how to tell their parishioners how to vote. I'm not saying that that's something that you want to do, but there are things that folks have walked away from that used to work and that used to was part of the community. One of the things that I've seen in my goings and comings is that there are people who say that they're not going to vote because their vote doesn't count. They don't understand that how important their vote is, and that if the vote wasn't important, we wouldn't have this whole flux of laws across the country in state legislatures that are trying to limit their ability to vote. So when you talk to people about how, if what they're saying is true, and you take the time to talk to folks, you can get people registered. If you explain to them, I was just talking earlier about a community activist in this town who one of the things that she says to people who don't vote, my vote doesn't count. She says, but your cousin, your brother, somebody went before a judge. We vote for judges. And if you didn't like how that judge treated your brother, cousin, sister, or yourself, then you have a way to get, to show them by voting either for them or against them. We've got to make voting personal, because the things that would happen, stuff's not even taught in school anymore. We used to in our churches, when there was not only Sunday school, there's also Black history or Negro history or African American history or whatever the title was. That used to happen. We have Black History Month, but it's been sanitized where you go to McDonald's and you can get a sandwich, as opposed to knowing about Carter G. Woodson, who started this whole idea about Black history and the importance of it. And then when we think about where we are, it is by design. We are here by design, and that design started 300 years ago, and it continues until today, where those that are in power want to keep power, and they're going to do whatever they can to maintain that power and send us all these straw men and straw women that are fake, and have us focusing on that when the real issue is who's going to maintain this power. And so I grew up in a household where my parents voted every opportunity the polls were open. And they stressed to us the whole thing about why it's so important to vote. We've got to do the same thing. Folks complain about their neighborhoods. And I'll never forget, a representative told me that, why do you go to that neighborhood? They don't vote. You can't get votes out of them. So why are you wasting your time? Elected officials, they look at those voting rolls, they look at those records, and they say, oh, well, that neighborhood, that precinct, those folks, they don't vote. So why am I worried about, dealing with them? And the other part why voting is so important, especially right now, is every 10 years, I'm changing the subject a little bit, but every 10 years, there's redistricting. And with redistricting, it's where the lines are drawn, and you have elected officials who never talk to the the 55 or the 60% of their district, because all they need is districts have been drawn in such a way that they only need a few people to elect them. That's the gerrymandering, and that's something that we also need to be aware of that's coming down the pike right now. So I'm going back on mute, but I just wanted to jump in to say that there's a calling on all of our lives, and that calling is for justice. And I think that justice requires us not to be silent. And one last thing, we talk about Dr. Martin Luther King. Coretta Scott King says, and I carry this quote, that the issue of human rights, civil rights, or justice requires a constant, steady awareness and working toward that, because evil will always come back to erode what justice has pushed forward. We can never forget that. So we have to be in a constant battle mode for justice. And I do appreciate this conversation. I'm going to go back on mute.
No, thank you. And all I was going to say was that before the representative became the representative, she stood in the place of the people, and she still does. And one of the things about it is she is definitely taken strides in understanding these processes. And even the pathway that she has gone from being an attorney to representing our youth to serving on city council, being city council president, mayor of Lucas County for a year or two. I believe it's about 2 years, and you can correct me, representative, and then moving on to being state district representative for District 44. And so this lets us know that, the possibilities are there. And the real fear is the fact that the possibilities are there, as Dr. Burke said. The real fear is the power. And even if we don't look at Obama, if we just look at what happened in Georgia for the runoff, if we just look at, the 2020 election, and one of the things we have to remember is it's not that we just need the Black vote. We need all of the votes, because in truth, Black people we don't have enough of us to really, shift that and make things happen. But how do we begin to reach out to others to begin to educate them? And while people are saying, where is the church? I guess the other question that I have, because not everybody is in the church. And so the next question is, how do we go beyond the four walls? I think COVID at this point in time has created the pathway for us to go beyond the four walls. But looking at, how we stand with our faith communities, and how we become instruments of change to dismantle the efforts. How do we begin to use these other platforms that we have? Not if for nothing more than what the Representative Hicks Hudson said, to educate, not just to, preach it out on Sunday, but to use these other digital platforms in ways that we can begin to educate, inspire, and activate people into taking action. Because, people, you said hope, Dr. Burke. People want hope. But as faith leaders, how do we begin the process? Because we don't have the power to do all of that, in a sense, because it's a person's choice. But how do we begin to inspire hope into people? How do we begin to, just as you were saying, letting people know that even though all of this is going on, that there really is a resurrection, that there really is something new coming about? And how do we and you mentioned worldview. The reality is, that worldview looks mighty dim right now. And so as pastors, faith leaders who have really these multitude of tools at hand, what are some other steps that we can take to reach the churched, the unchurched, the saved, the unsaved, or those who are questioning, or those just who stand on the platform that all of us stand on, and that's the platform of belief? And I'll start with you, Dr. Burke.
Okay. Let me kind of illustrate what I think, because I think, as a pastor, as a preacher, I can't touch everybody, but I can touch somebody. And I think my objective is the people I touch can touch other people, who can touch other people. I think that's what Jesus was doing when he chose 12 people. And he chose 12 people to disciple so that they can touch other people. Now, when I say touch, what I'm saying is, I think it's imperative that we meet people where they are, you know, and we and to show some care and concern for where people are. Let me give you an illustration. Then I'll move. I'll get out the way. A number of years ago, my brother-in-law, my wife's a Mississippi girl. You know, I'm a Florida boy, so we know what Southern living is all about. Even as children, you know, me into the 7th grade, we had to fight every day to go to school because there were certain people who didn't want us there. You know, we had to literally fight. They wanted to fight. You know, but a few years ago, my brother-in-law came here. He was on drugs. I mean, really on drugs. You know, and my brother-in-law, he's a pretty boy. You know, got to give a gaff. You know, and I'll never forget. We picked him up on the bus. He didn't look good at all. He really didn't. So he came here, and I think, you know, kind of in the back of his mind, he recognized if I come to my sister, who's very principle orientated, and to my brother-in-law, who is principle orientated, and I can get in an environment that will assist me or help me, you know. So he came and lived with us, you know. And he was on drugs. And so one of the things my wife and I did, you know, they had a lot. They had at that time, and some of them coming back, but they had all kind of NA meetings every day in the city of Toledo. My brother-in-law never went to an NA meeting without us. And he went to 3 a day, you know, in the morning, at noon, and at night. And one of us was with him every time he went to an NA meeting. What I'm saying is we stepped into his world. We were not drug addicts. We don't do drugs. Neither one of us has never done drugs like that. We just never done that. But we stepped into his world. We went with him every time. We went to the meeting so much that we got to know all the people in the meetings. They got to know us. And as a consequence, some of the leaders came to me one day and they said, well, Dr. Bird, we need a meeting place, and we need a place where they won't charge us so much, because a part of their bylaws is they have to pay something. And so they start having meetings at our church building on Tuesday nights. Before the pandemic, if you would drive by Glass City, you would think that we were having church, you know. But there was a gathering of people in there, you know, that would they would come, they would meet, they communicated with me about what they was going to do, how they were going to do it, and 2 of my deacons would go down there, Randolph, and one of my other brothers would go down there every Tuesday night, make the coffee, you know, and did everything, you know, and so they felt at home, and we consequently been able to build a relationship with all of those people. And the pandemic hurt it, but recently they've come back. They've come back. You know, they were calling me and calling Randolph, and you know, we want to come back. You know, we want to start a meeting. Fine, that's a meeting. I didn't, you know, every now and then I would go down there because they gave me good therapy. You know, good, because these are very honest people. You know, and I was amazed by the person who got the most celebration was the person who was clean one day. Got a standing ovation. But my point is, I think part of what we need to do is to meet people where they are. We want to get them to a particular place. But I do believe part of the thing that I believe we must do, and that's what Jesus did, is step into those people's world. And the second thing is that we ought to create disciples. People who want to step into people's world. So I step into some people's world, and the people that I teach and train, and God has put in my space and in my place, they step into somebody else's world, and all of us are stepping into people's world outside of our religiosity. You know, we take our robe off, you know, and to step into the world of people and have other people that are in our circle to step into the world of people. And I think we can make the kind of connections or reconnections that's necessary with people so that we can get this done.
That's a powerful statement, and I hear that often. Don't ask us to step into your world if you're not willing to step into our world. And that's a powerful statement. Um, Reverend Willis, we'd like to hear from you.
I I sat and I listened to Dr. Burt, and what he said is absolutely true. You have to try and meet people where they are. And once you find out really what is going on with them, they need to hear the truth. Now, you can't just sugarcoat what's going on. You got to be for real with them. Once they hear the truth and really understand that you're going to be by their side, they don't have a problem of coming up out of what they're in. I've met many people that, matter of fact, I got some in church right now that were in their zone, quote unquote, back years ago. But just being able to meet them where they are and not criticize them, but get them to understand that there is a benefit in making a change. When you do that, then you're well on your way. Yes, the pandemic stopped us from doing a lot of things. However, God never left us. So therefore, if he never left us, then we have to stay persistent in what we believe. We have other avenues now of doing ministry, such as social media, something that we never really did before. But now we have the social media, and we have many people that are on social media. Some are on there for the wrong things. But one thing that's good that comes out of this, pastors being persistent and using social media as a tool in order to reach those. Because as you began to get that ear of a person that's on social media, that's been on there for something different, but he heard something that you said one Sunday, he's going to tell somebody else. And it's a trickle effect. And the thing we just have to do is be persistent in our message. And the thing about it is, the Bible is so understandable, but you got to be able to put it in a way that people understand it. The scripture says, if my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways. As we continue to share God's word, you're going to find more and more that are going to become to do that. I love the platform that we have now because it's a new norm for what ministry once was. Yes, the gathering is not what it used to be. However, you're still reaching people. Matter of fact, I'm reaching more people now being a pastor than I was when, there was no pandemic. And the other part about that is you got people that are still in that comfort zone, which we got to still preach the word and teach the word so that they come out of it. And as we as pastors are given instructions, we just have to follow it closely, because as long as you follow the instructions that God gives you and don't venture off into something yourself, you're going to make it. But I think our job is to just continue to try, teach God's word, meet people where they are, and continue to get them to understand. The Bible says the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. So what we've got to do is just be persistent in that message. And if your message stays the same, pretty soon it's going to be something that they're going to get used to, and they're going to hear it, they're going to see it, and they're going to be able to talk to other people. Just like he talked about his brother-in-law being one of the recoveries. The recovery people are some of the strongest people now that we know of, because they believe in what it is they're trying to do. And they don't mind testifying about it. And their testimony helps other people. And that's the one thing we got to get back in the fact of doing. When God has done something tremendous for you, you got to be able to share it with somebody, because somebody may be sitting outside afraid to do anything. But when they hear that testimony and it hit their street, they're going to say, that's the same thing happened to me. But again, we can't be afraid of the gospel. We can't be afraid to deliver God's word. And we can't be afraid to go into the highways and byways where people are that are suffering. Because the more we do that, the stronger we become. And we become that change agent, that one that just constantly goes on and on. And as we do that, you can feel good about yourself. It's tiring because many people don't want to do it. But if you are persistent, you're going to get tired. And I've always said nothing good comes easy. You got to get out there and spend some time. Jesus did it. So we got to do the same thing.
Thank you for that, Reverend Willis. Pastor Pastor Walthall.
I thank God as always for my friends, Pastor Burt, Pastor Willis, and Pastor Dinkins. I always believe that you're the product of your life experiences. And whenever these people speak, I learn so much. Matter of fact, I probably won't even have to write a sermon for Sunday. I already got it. But the bottom line is, for me, my life experiences have been totally different. I believe the scripture says that you got to work while it is day because the night
Oh,
is
yeah.
coming when nobody can work.
Hmm.
I've been blessed. Uh, Paul Hicks Hudson, who's sitting there, was one of the great leaders we had in our city.
Yes.
And Jack Ford, my friend, was a great leader, a great mayor. And I'll stop right there.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say I couldn't say something nice about somebody else, but I can speak on these two. God allowed me to pastor a church and work in the city administration. And I am a living witness to the atmosphere there. Their atmosphere was when something really went bad in the black community, they'd either say, well, they're not going to come in numbers, number one, because they fight amongst themselves all the time. And then they said, if they get on a topic, they're not going to stay with it in length of time.
Mm-hmm.
So all three of you have said the same thing: consistency and unity.
That's
I
right.
believe that's the answer. I believe that, and you all said they all, the young fellows anyway, criticized me. Said, "Well, I thought every sermon you preach, you're gonna spend time talking about the cross.
That's right.
You're gonna talk about the birth, death, and
Mm-hmm.
resurrection. That's old school." I said,
Well,
"That's not old school. That's school,
that's
period,
school period.
because that's the power of resurrection."
That's right.
And if you ask me to come to your church or anywhere else and talk, I'm gonna say something about he died, buried in the grave. But on the third day, he got up from the grave. That's power there.
Yes.
And we can't go back on that. And we got to come together as clergy, as leaders and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot, and be strong and be consistent and keep on telling the story.
That's
And as I
right.
said earlier, if these young folks and old folks knew the real history behind what's going on, and why I think, some folk don't think voting is important. We talked about that. But if it's not important, why are they spending so much time trying to water it down? Why are they spending so much time trying to change it? It's important. It's always been important that a person would have a voice in their life and in their future. But we've heard some great statements today, and I just pray that all the leaders, whether they're clergy or not, would understand how important it is that we come together, that we understand our history, that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, and press on to a better day. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Press on for a better day. I have a question for you, Representative, but before I ask the question, is there anything that you want to comment on what the three pastors have just said? No. Okay. One of the things that you
No,
said,
I'm good.
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Good. You said press on for a better day, Pastor Walthall. And that's true. But we have to, my question becomes, with all the conspiracy theories and the myths that the 2020 election was fraudulent, unsecure, unlawful, with people with fear running rampant, there being this brokenness of people when it comes to not only the church, but politics. My question becomes, Representative, is how do we, in relationship one with another, as the legislator or the politician, as well as the clergy and the community, how do we begin to build this scarlet thread? Number one, I think, is there a way that we can depoliticize this, to humanize it? Because what happens is when things are sitting within a political space, it continues to carry the scent of all the other politicians that's engaged. And we always know the hear ye news. The good news doesn't last as long as the bad news. So my question is, how do we, as not only clergy and legislators who come, but organizations, because you said earlier that there are certain restrictions that will come into play if this were to pass. And the first thing I thought about was returning citizens, people coming home.
Mm-hmm.
I thought about people who, who are suffering from different barriers, be it financial, collateral consequences, racial. How do we come together? What's one of the ways that we can begin to talk about this as a whole? Number one, to insulate you and others who are standing with us. Number two, to educate so that people will feel secure and understand that this is lawful. And voting has, it's been the same. All of a sudden, the story is changing. Because we need to reach the least of these in all of these places. And then the third thing is, what are some of the ways that, because what I do feel is this, is that while we are saying that there are sermons that need to be preached, and there's a word that needs to go out that comes from the Bible, I still stand on the fact that we have to talk to people right where they are. And sometimes they may not want to hear that. So how do we be able to take resources that you as a representative can provide and begin to depoliticize, to humanize these things, to then organize and engage and mobilize people to insulate, support, and activate?
Well, I will say this, you can't depoliticize this. This
Okay.
is politics, pure and simple. Politics, power, pure and simple. And when so when we look at this premise, I think that's a false premise that politics are dirty, politics don't belong in the church. Every last one of you know that one of the very first places that politics is played is in the church. And it's really no different than what's being played out in the public forum or in the legislature. How we can address it is really by having education and being present in that political space. And I don't mean being present through the CNNs, the MSNs, or the Fox News, but really being present in the room, or looking at, in Ohio, we have the Ohio channel where everyone can look and watch this House sessions, the Senate sessions, the committee sessions. There's information that goes out every week about the agenda for the different committees, or the House session, the Senate session, so that people can be made aware of. I do a newsletter that I send out every month, and I'm trying to make sure that I get to as many people as possible, so that they can have information about what I think is happening and how it affects the people in District 44. By design, as I said earlier, if you consider that this country was founded on 3/5 of a man, not even a woman, 3/5 of a man was what the South could use in order for them to have a fair apportionment of seats in Congress at the beginning of this country. If only white men who had property were able to vote. So if we know our history, bringing that down to today, while others can vote, other populations can vote and should vote, if we're talking about a democracy, those white property males are the ones that still want to be in power. And so we have to be real clear about what we're looking at, and that they walk out with ID. They walk out with whatever, their social security card, whatever it is that they need, so that they don't have those barriers about running around trying to get those. That's a very small thing that can be done. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to get folks to help me show the need, and that it's doable and possible, and not improbable, to get folks so that they're able to, when they walk out, they're able to start their lives with as few hurdles as necessary. But for the church has to remember and regain its sense of purpose. And if we quote scriptures, Jesus said, "You render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and unto God that which is God." So I've never, and I believe this very strongly, that there is no separation between church and state. It's a continuum, and it's a respect for both institutions. And what we have to do is return that respect to both institutions, and to really go where people are, to explain to them what it is, and also to go to the ministers and to the church leaders and to explain to them what they can do and what the roles are, and some of the things, by just having a parishioner go um, to if we're in Toledo City Council agenda review. There you'll get to know about all of the legislation that's happening, to get for us at the House and at the Senate, to get the agenda, or to know what bills are being introduced, or to have constant contact with your representative. That's important, because that's the way you know what's going on, and we can't do things without you being aware of them. And we can't, and that's what's happening. Legislators are making decisions, doing things, and the next thing you know, they've passed laws that just make it harder for us to live and to work and to raise our families. And so, and I like what Brother Burt said about hope. There is hope, because even in the darkest hours, light continues to shine because folks show up. I believe that democracy is participatory sport. So that means you've got to vote. You've got to stay vigilant about knowing what's going on, and you got to hold your elected officials accountable when they do something that's not what you want. Writing letters, emails, phone calls, all those, for people, because this one, Bill Seitz, who is the author of House Bill 294, said that he was not concerned with the cards that were sent to his office asking not to institute the changes in 294. He called it drivel. That those things are not, because he knew what was best for voting in Ohio. That's the arrogance that we're dealing with, and those are the things that I believe that the church leaders, people, can fight up against and push up against, and we can be successful.
Thank you for that, Representative Hicks Hudson. One question I do have, when you mentioned, do you think that the fact that the evangelicals have had a louder voice than maybe some of the other clergy inside of politics, and they try to legislate their faith, makes it a little, do you think that insulates, makes the arrogance that Sites has, or is it just the fact that this is Sites?
So the evangelical mission, they deal with more of the social issues, and I do think that there is a strong, so I look at it not so much evangelicals as I look at it as they bought into the Trump era and the idea about returning America to what it once was, which it never really was. And so they may be louder, but I do think that the other faiths have not seen their ability. They don't believe that they have the ability to speak as they do, whereas the evangelicals do. And so, and they tell their members, I'll never forget this lady who said she had never voted, and that was in 2004, 2005. And she was stressing to make sure that her registration was in at the Board of Elections, because she was told by her pastor that she needed to register and she needed to do her duty, because and she used that passage I just told you about, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and unto God that would. And so they took and put the civic duty of voting within the confines and the framework of religion. And we don't do that. We're told, we're afraid, because they'll mess with our nonprofit status. And so, I mean, I think that's where where you start off talking about we've kind of slacked off. Whereas in the old days, the church was a place to organize civil rights, voting rights. Uh, the church was where we got our marching orders, so to speak, and that's not happening today. And I think that's the call, and that's an easy lift for churches to do.
Thank you.
To be educated and to be activated. Yes, I'm sorry.
No, that's wonderful. So Pastor Willis, Dr. Bird, Pastor Walthall, Pastor Willis, would you like to comment on what Representative Hicks Hudson
Yeah.
said?
Yeah, let me just say what Paula just talked about a minute ago. The role of the clergy is to still give instructions. And keep in mind, the membership that follows you are going to do what you say do and be obedient. Our job is to still educate our people about the importance of voting. We do that. I do it on a Sunday. Whenever I got a group together, you have to encourage them to use their God-given right, because it's their right to vote. You encourage them, you communicate to them, and then the other part about that, you don't tell them what candidate to vote for. You don't do that. However, you encourage them to vote. And after I finish encouraging them to vote, I'm going to step out of my pulpit. We talk about 501c3 status. And I'm going to say, here's who I'm voting for. And this is what you've got to do. You got to make that be effective, because the more you do that, then that word is constantly going forward. So we just have to be that strong tower. I use it like that. We've got to be able to be up in the mass and hear the information. And then once we hear the information, we got to be there to disagree with it. Because if you're not there, you can't disagree with it. But if you are there and it comes up and your voice is able to be heard, then you speak at that particular time. Because if not, it's going to be a constant struggle of doing what we always do and getting what we always get. Change only comes by us taking a stand.
Change only comes by with us taking a stance. Thank you for that. Dr. Bird, on that note, I know that you have something you'd like to say and we'd like to hear.
Evangelicals, all of the evangelical preachers don't like each other.
Oh, that's true.
They don't really like each other. They but what they do is they stand together. Back during the civil rights movement, can you imagine all those different preachers and civic leaders all day in the room? They trying to plan how we gonna address the issues. They if you read about it, if you've seen it, they didn't always get along in the room. They didn't get along in the room. They had debate and dialogue. Well, I think we ought to do it this way. I think we ought to do it that way. I think we, and when it comes to today, some kind of reason, I think that we got to all like each other to get this done.
Yeah.
You got family members you don't like, but y'all get things done. In my church, when you meet your particular leadership in your church, y'all sit in the room and argue. But when you come out as one. And I think we need to adopt those models that work. We don't have to go to dinner together. We don't have to eat breakfast together. I don't have to get this fuzzy feeling about you as a person, because the purpose is greater than me and you getting along.
That's right.
In terms of people. What's the purpose? What's the greater purpose? That you come in a room, you talk about it, you can dialogue, you can debate, and then you come out with a strategy, and then you come out in the world as religious leaders, and you walk together.
That's right.
You see? So I said to my wife, there's no need for the church to know we mad at each other this morning. Let's go and do what God has called us to do. They don't need to know you're mad at me. and we do what we need to do. And then when we get back home, we'll come back to the table and try to reconcile. And I think that's the problem. And the foundation of that is that we are motivated by something other than the primary purpose.
Yes.
We have other motivations, but if we could get together, come in a room and hash it out, talk about it, be real, and then decide we're going to do everybody can't get everything they want, but we're going to do this because of the greater purpose. When we come out into the world, we give the world a message of unity. And that's what they did to make things happen. And that's what we have to do to make things happen.
I think I'll send an offering on that one because I do believe a house that's divided cannot stand. And, if that house doesn't have a strong foundation, when the winds blow, it just breaks it up. We learned that real early when they told us about 3 little pigs. So, we learned it real early which house would stand. But the thing about it is they kept building together. Even when the first house got blown down, they still built together. When the second house got blown down, they built together. And then, you know what? By the third lesson, they knew how to make the house stand. So I thank you for that. And those are some of the ways that we can even teach our children, because we can't just start with our adults. We have to start this message of hope and the invitation of coming in the room, not just to the adults.
That's right.
But we have to extend an invitation to all. What's the song say? Come on in the room. So, Reverend Walthall, come on in the room. We need to hear from you.
Well, it's certainly good to hear somebody want to hear from me anywhere I go. I'm a rebel type of guy. But as I said, I agree with everything that's been said. Fantastic statements. And as I said earlier, we got to put in the work as leaders. I draw the parallel between we always have a garden. I was raised up, folks from the South, always had a garden. And that food out of that garden always tastes better than Kroger or Walmart, wherever you went. It's grown same vegetable, grown in same kind of dirt. But the pride and the feeling that you had is that this is your carrot, this is your squash. And I believe if we put in the work in the political system and in the church and everywhere else and teach our young folk to do the same thing, they can have pride in what they accomplish and won't get so frustrated. You don't plant something one day and the next day there's a tree, a cherry tree. You put in the work, you take care of it, you nurture it. And we got these politicians that haven't really put in the work. They come and they say a lot of fancy things, and if we don't hold them accountable for it, it doesn't go right. But I like what's been said. I respect everybody on panel. I pray that as this goes out, that folks will learn something and put in the work, and then we can rejoice in the results that we get. Understand that God is still in control, and that's all I can say. Thank you, each and every one of you, for your comments. It means a lot to me. Put in the work.
That is so true. Put in the work. But Dr. Burt said it, before that, we have got to come and understand that there is a greater purpose beyond our dislikes. And we should be able to set aside our dislike to find out what we do like so that we can come together and then put in that work. Because again, somebody has to plant the seed. We know that Abraham didn't see all of the promises of God manifested. He saw his son being born, but he didn't see the nation. The nation didn't come till Jacob, and even after that. And so we have to understand that the work is it is putting in the work, understanding that the work, some of the things we do today, be it planting the seed or watering the seed, that by the time the tree grows, the fruit that's on the tree, the work that we have done allows somebody to come and pluck the fruit off the tree. And hopefully that person will have had the knowledge to take the seed that's in the fruit and plant another tree for another generation. And so as our assignment from God, we have to plant the seed. And we have to teach people or prepare it to be watered. But even before that, we have to till the ground. We have to get the soil ready. We have to aerate it. There's a process. And so we do understand that, even though, as I've heard Pastor Walthall say in his young age, he doesn't understand it. He just heard about it. There were people who struggled. But Dr. Willis said in his seasoned age, he understood the struggle. So we get to see the comparison and the contrast. But the reality is that we have to fuse the old with the new. If we are going to shift a paradigm, we have to understand that there are things about the old paradigm that works. And I don't want no unseasoned food. I want my food to be seasoned. So bring me some seasoned people to this table when we come into the room, so that we can sit down and feast together. As Dr. Burt said, we've got to teach, we've got to feast, and we've got to touch. And after we do all of that, then we can begin to plant, because we have planted the seed. I want to thank each and every one of you. Pastor Paula, I'm sorry, I done elevated you.
Thank you. No.
I know the feeling, because I was ready to run.
I bow to all you all.
But Representative Hicks Hudson, again, thank you for coming. You are one who inspires me in so many different ways, because you fight, and you stay in the fight. You are like an oak tree. The winds can come and blow. The branches may bend, but one thing, you have not broken. And so just know that we are behind you. We are behind you. We are insulating you. And those others who we can stand with, who stand for. And we have to remember that. And it is critical, I say this again, that we do that. It is critical that we do that, because the only way that the good news can come sometimes is if we help those who are preparing the manuscript for the good news. And that may be these policies that come out. I want to thank you, Reverend Dr. Willis, as always, bringing a strong voice, and Dr. Bird and Pastor Walthall for bringing such, fire and fury in this room, and education, and ways that we can just really begin to meet and teach one another. I want to thank you all for the seeds that you have planted in our listeners, but also in my own heart. I want to thank you all again for just being a part of this conversation. I definitely want to continue this conversation next. In our next 2 weeks, we air There Is a Word on a bi-weekly basis. We definitely want to continue this discussion. We want to bring in the voice of women, because we also know that the Black woman's voice is very critical at this time. We want to understand that suppression shows up in many different ways. Also, I do know that Representative Hicks Hudson, you mentioned something about gerrymandering or the redistricting. So I want to give you an opportunity before we close out to make that announcement, but to let everyone know, 2 weeks from now, if somebody could give me that second date, I believe it's September the 2nd. We will have our second conversation, and we will discuss early voting and the importance of the women's vote, or the woman's vote. And again, that's September 2nd at 6:00 p.m. We will have the link go on Facebook at Black Women Rising, as well as we will have it on our YouTube channel. From there, I'd like to pass on to Representative Hicks Hudson to make your announcement. I do believe there's some things that, residents of Toledo can take part in.
Thank you so much. In fact, it's throughout the state of Ohio, but I don't have in front of me all of the dates. But this Thursday, August the 26th at 2:30 p.m. at the University of Toledo, Libby Hall, the Redistricting Commission will come to listen to people talk about how they perceive these maps being drawn for the next congressional and the state house and state senate districts. Gerrymandering is what has happened to Ohio. We hold, among other things, the infamous of being one of the most gerrymandered states in the country, where we have, as we know, Congresswoman Capter's district, the Congressional 9th District, starting in Toledo and going east into Cleveland, And there are portions of her district that at times when Lake Erie is over its banks, her district is underwater. Parts of her district is underwater. That doesn't make any sense because while we're Northern Ohio, Cleveland is different from Toledo and the places in between. But we're fortunate to have a really great congresswoman who will go from each part of her district to make sure she represents us all. The other really bad one is a Congressman, Jim Jordan, who lives in Urbana, but his district comes all the way north up into Sandusky, Erie County. So those are just the two most egregious forms of gerrymandering. But what this does is it allows for your representative not to represent you. If we had more equal districts, we would have a more equal representation. In fact, statistics have shown and facts show that Ohio is really not a red state or a blue state. It's a purple state. We're pretty much 50 some, it's a 50-50, not quite equal, but it's more like that than it is what is being portrayed in the news. So I'm asking everyone, especially you who are on this meeting tonight with me, to join me next Thursday at 2:30 at Libby Hall at the University of Toledo to listen and to give testimony about redistricting and how redistricting is so important, that we have representatives that represent us, who know us, that we know them, and that they understand what the community should look like and who they represent. So I thank you so much, Bishop, for inviting me, for letting me be a part of this conversation. I think it's so important that men and women of God understand that their duty is also in the public square, and that when we have people of faith and people of integrity and people who love justice, then the hope that Reverend Burke talks about is more likely to happen than for us to be standing on the sidelines and letting other people just prepare the narrative for us. So again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I would like to invite everyone, if you want to learn more, we'll put something on our Facebook page. I invite you to go to our Facebook page and like Black Women Rising. Also, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, I think, by clicking the like button and subscribe. But I would be remiss not to thank Sue Webley, who handles all of our logistics and the technology and has made all of these things possible. I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you for all the behind scenes work that you do, how you have made this available, and dealing with me, as I call your problem child, as we was making this happen. I want to say thank you again to our guest panelists. I want to say thank you to our listeners. Without you, there is no us. We hope that we have began to till the ground, to plant the seed, so that we can all come together and glean a harvest, both present and future, for today, for our young, and even generationally down the line. I want you to know that I love you, and I wish you a great night and a great weekend ahead. Have a wonderfully blessed evening. Thank you.